Close your eyes and step back, far beyond memory, far beyond history, into a time when Earth was young. Imagine a world not yet ready for forests, for rivers filled with fish, for skies filled with birds. Instead, you stand on the shore of a planet still finding its shape, a planet both fierce and fragile, restless and magnificent. This is Earth, nearly 4 billion years ago, long before life left its mark, long before any voice broke the silence. The sky is unlike anything you know. It is thick, coppery and strange, heavy with gases that would choke you if you tried to breathe. Sunlight filters through as if through stained glass, a dim amber glow that never reaches its full brightness. The blue you take for granted today does not exist here. Instead, the heavens shimmer in shades of gold, rust, and crimson. At times, lightning rips across the heavens in blinding arcs, cracking against clouds swollen with chemical storms. Each bolt sears the air with raw energy, igniting the gases into brief, violent flares of light. And then, silence returns, save for the low, endless hum of this restless world. Beneath that alien sky stretch the oceans, vast and unbroken. But these are not the familiar seas of today. No turquoise shallows, no coral reefs, no rolling surf against sandy beaches. These waters are darker, heavier, filled with dissolved iron and minerals drawn from the restless crust below. They shimmer strangely, sometimes green, sometimes black, sometimes glowing faintly under the dim light of the sun. The air above carries the scent of sulfur, the breath of volcanoes that roar ceaselessly in the distance. Across the horizon, land rises in jagged fragments. Volcanic islands thrust upward, their peaks crowned with smoke and fire. Lava spills down their sides in glowing rivers, hissing as it meets the waves. The ground trembles beneath your feet, for the Earth has not yet settled into calm continents. It is still shaping and reshaping itself, breaking apart, colliding, melting, and reforming. Each island is temporary, each mountain a fleeting breath in the deep rhythm of time. And yet within this chaos, there is an unexpected peace. The oceans cradle the world like a blanket, holding its heat, soothing its surface, steadying its rhythm. The tides rise and fall, pulled by the distant moon, itself a new companion in the heavens. The currents twist and swirl, carrying minerals and energy across the globe. Though the world is raw and fiery, it is also balanced, each violent eruption countered by the cooling embrace of the seas. If you stood on the edge of this young Earth, the silence would overwhelm you. There are no insects to hum in the air, no animals to cry in the distance, no leaves to rustle in the wind. The only sounds are the hiss of steam rising from the oceans, the crash of waves against jagged stone, and the distant thunder of volcanoes. It is a silence so deep it hums, a silence that feels alive, as though the world itself is listening. But this world is not empty, it is waiting. For in the depths of those oceans, something stirs. Tiny molecules, invisible to the eye, swirl in warm currents. They collide, break apart, and reform. They twist together in strange dances, driven by energy from lightning above, from the heat of vents below, from the very restlessness of the Earth itself. Though lifeless still, the seas are rich with possibility. Every drop holds the ingredients of what is to come. It is here, in this silence, that life will soon take its first breath. Not in great leaps, not in sudden miracles, but in whispers, whispers carried on waves, whispered in molecules, whispered in the long patience of deep time. And so the Earth waits. The oceans stretch endlessly, the sky glows faintly with fire, and the mountains rise and fall in molten tides. A planet raw and untamed, yet perfectly poised for the most delicate of beginnings. From this silence will come a sound that never ends, the sound of life itself. This is Earth before life, vast, fierce, silent, and filled with promise. A stage waiting for its first actors, a canvas waiting for its first colors. A world waiting not with urgency, but with patience, because creation, in the deepest sense, always begins in stillness. The oceans of the early Earth were endless, so vast, so deep, that they seemed to swallow the horizon in every direction. They were the heart of the planet, the great cradle from which all things would one day arise. And yet, in these early ages, they were unlike the seas you know today. These waters were not blue. They did not shimmer like sapphires under the sun, for the sun itself was veiled behind a heavy atmosphere. Instead, the oceans glowed darkly, tinted with minerals and metals dissolved from the rocks that bled into them. Iron turned the water's hues of green and rust, sometimes shining faintly in the filtered light, sometimes appearing as pools of shadow beneath the copper sky. They were alive not with fish or coral or kelp, but with chemistry, with swirling tides of potential. Imagine standing upon a rocky shore, gazing out at this vast expanse. There is no line of seagulls swooping low over the waves, no ships cresting the horizon, no laughter of children playing in the sand. The world is still empty of such things. All that greets you is the immensity of water, rolling and surging, whispering in endless rhythm against jagged stone. The waves crash with force, then retreat, pulling pebbles back into the depths. They sigh and hiss as they fall into caves, leaving behind foam that quickly dissolves into the wind. Yet even this sound, though constant, feels quiet compared to the roaring silence of the world. The seas are powerful, but they are also lonely, for there is nothing yet to swim through them, nothing yet to sing within them. And still there is beauty here, a beauty in the way the waters stretch without end, like mirrors for the copper sky, a beauty in their persistence, their calm after storms, their eternal presence even as land shifts and volcanoes rise. These waters are patient. They do not hurry, they simply exist, holding the earth in their embrace. Beneath the surface, however, the oceans are not still. They churn with currents, invisible rivers winding through the depths. Warm waters rise from volcanic cracks in the seafloor, carrying minerals and heat. Cold waters sink, spiraling downward into the shadows. These endless movements stir the chemistry of the world, mixing salt, iron, sulfur, and countless other elements into a living broth. It is within these currents that possibility lingers, for life requires movement, and the oceans provide it in abundance. The seas stretch deeper than mountains are tall. In some places, trenches yawn into darkness so profound that no light has ever reached them. Down there, the water presses with crushing weight, enough to silence even the strongest of sounds. And yet, even in these places of eternal shadow, the stirrings of life will one day begin. For the oceans do not judge between shallow and deep, they are vast enough to hold all beginnings. Above storms rage, their rains feeding the waters in torrents. Each drop carries with it particles from the air, carbon, nitrogen, and other gases, delivering them to the sea. Lightning cracks across the sky, its fiery touch igniting the upper layers of the ocean, sparking reactions that ripple through the surface. The rains fall endlessly, washing the young world into its seas, creating a cycle of exchange. Sky to water, water to rock, rock back to sky. All things meet in the ocean. All things return there. For billions of years, these waters are the Earth's only song. They rise with the tides, fall with the winds, and crash with the weight of storms. They are the first storytellers, their voices shaping coastlines, carrying whispers of chemistry, weaving the patterns that will one day bloom into life. If you listen closely, you might imagine that they are already speaking, not in words, but in rhythm, in persistence, in the eternal cycle of ebb and flow. To gaze upon these oceans is to feel both small and infinite. Small because their vastness dwarfs every stone, every island, every mountain. Infinite because within them lies the future, the birth of cells, the rise of communities, the first steps of life's long journey. Though empty to the eye, the oceans are overflowing with promise. And so the waters wait. They ripple softly in the dim light, carrying within their depths the seeds of everything that is to come. They do not need urgency, for they know the patience of time. They know that in their embrace, life will soon awaken. The endless waters of Earth are not just seas. They are a womb, a shelter, a home for beginnings. They are the cradle in which the first heartbeat of life will stir. And though no creature yet swims, no eye yet sees, no mind yet dreams, the oceans are alive with possibility. These are the waters that will nurture the first bacteria, the silent drifters who will one day change the world. But for now, the seas simply wait, endless, eternal, beautiful in their silence. Far below the surface of the young Earth's oceans, hidden in the shadows where no sunlight can reach, the seafloor trembles. Here, in the dark valleys of the deep, the Earth's molten heart presses upward, its heat seeping through cracks in the crust. From these fractures, plumes of water rise, carrying with them the fire of the planet's core. They are the hydrothermal vents, the breath of Earth itself, billowing warmth into the endless waters. These vents are strange and mesmerizing. Some are called black smokers, towering chimneys that spew out mineral-rich water as dark as ink. The plumes twist and curl as they rise, heavy with iron, sulfur, and other elements pulled from the molten rock below. Around them, the ocean glows faintly, as though the water itself remembers the fire from which it was born. To witness one is to watch a hidden bonfire beneath the sea. The water near the vent is hot enough to sear, yet only a few feet away it is freezing, colder than ice. The two extremes swirl together, creating shimmering currents that twist like ghosts in the deep. It is a place of contradiction, fire in the water, warmth in the cold, light in the dark. And in that contradiction lies possibility. Imagine drifting through this darkness. All around you, silence presses like a weight. The pressure of the deep is crushing, the kind of silence that feels eternal. And then, suddenly, you come upon one of these vents. The darkness is broken by clouds of shimmering minerals, glowing faintly like embers in the night. The water hisses, boils, and cools again in an endless cycle. It feels alive, as though the earth itself is breathing. These vents are not merely curiosities, they are cauldrons. Within their heated plumes, simple molecules swirl together, colliding again and again with the force of energy. The walls of the chimneys grow layer by layer, coated with minerals that create tiny chambers, little pockets where reactions can take place. These natural laboratories are places of creation, shaping the building blocks that will one day become life. If the oceans are the cradle of life, then these vents are its hearth. Here, warmth does not come from the sun, but from the earth's own heart. In their plumes, chemistry dances to a rhythm older than life itself, a rhythm of heat, pressure, and persistence. It is strange to think that in the darkest corners of the ocean, far from light, the first sparks of life may have kindled. Yet this is the way of beginnings, not in grand bursts of spectacle, but in quiet, hidden places where time is allowed to flow without interruption. For millions upon millions of years, these vents breathed steadily, mixing chemicals, cycling energy, and preparing the world for something more. Picture the minerals as they swirl together, sulfur forming bonds, iron locking into crystals, carbon weaving into chains. None of it yet alive, but all of it alive with potential. Each reaction leaves behind traces, each trace another step toward complexity. The vents are patient teachers, repeating their lessons endlessly, never tiring, never rushing. And above, the oceans carry their gifts away. Currents spread the mineral-rich waters, carrying whispers of fire across the globe. Though invisible, these whispers will one day give rise to cells, tiny drifters that owe their first breath to the fires of the sea. Even now, in the modern world, life clings to vents like these. Strange creatures gather in their warmth, living in places where light never shines. Worms, crabs, and bacteria thrive in the same conditions that shaped the first sparks of existence. It is a reminder that these fires beneath the sea are not relics of the past, but living echoes of the Earth's earliest story. In the deep Archean Ocean, though there were no worms or crabs, yet only chemistry, only potential. But already the pattern was there. Already the planet was showing what was possible when heat and water met, when energy and patience intertwined. So the vents continued their steady work, breathing warmth into the oceans, shaping chemistry into complexity, and waiting, endlessly waiting, for the day when one of those collisions would cross the threshold from lifelessness to life. The fires beneath the sea were not grand in their display, not loud in their proclamation. They did not shout their importance, nor did they demand attention. Instead, they glowed quietly, faithfully, for millions of years, until the moment was right. And from that quiet fire, something extraordinary would awaken. In the deep hush of the Archean seas, something remarkable was unfolding. It was not yet life, not yet the spark of a heartbeat or the stirring of a breath, but the first quiet steps toward those things. Within the oceans, in the warm plumes of hydrothermal vents, and in the shallow pools kissed by storms, chemistry was beginning to weave its slow and patient tapestry. The elements of the young Earth were everywhere, carbon drifting through the air as gases, nitrogen raining down in storms, sulfur carried in the heat of volcanic fire, and iron bleeding into the oceans from restless stone. These were the raw ingredients, scattered and restless, awaiting the hands of time to shape them into something greater. Imagine for a moment watching as lightning streaks across the heavy copper sky. A bolt splits the clouds, its power coursing down into the shallow seas. The water hisses, flashes, and then stills again. But in that moment, something has changed. Molecules have been broken apart, their bonds rearranged, new patterns written into the chemistry of the water. Amino acids form tiny, delicate building blocks of life, born not from magic, but from energy and chance. Elsewhere deep beneath the surface, the story is the same but written in different ink. At the mouths of hydrothermal vents, hot mineral-rich water collides with the frigid ocean around it. The minerals crystallize into walls of stone, riddled with tiny chambers, each one a pocket where molecules can gather. Within these chambers, simple compounds combine, break apart, and recombine over and over, as if the Earth itself is experimenting with possibilities. It is slow, so very slow. Millions of years pass, each moment carrying countless collisions, each collision another trial in the vast experiment of creation. Most end in nothing. Bonds form, then shatter. Chains of molecules grow, then unravel. But the Earth does not mind. Time is abundant and patience is infinite. The oceans are laboratories vast beyond comprehension, and failure is not defeat. It is simply another step on the path. Picture it, strands of molecules drifting in the current, some clinging briefly to rock, some spiraling through the water like dancers. They do not yet know the purpose. They do not yet know survival. And yet already there is a sense of direction, a subtle leaning toward complexity. Molecules that bind a little more tightly last a little longer. Chains that fold in certain ways become more stable. Patterns begin to echo, and out of the endless sea of randomness, order begins to glimmer faintly. There is a coziness to this thought, that even in the darkest waters of a restless earth, there was patience, quiet repetition, and the first whispers of organization. It is like listening to the crackle of a fire, knowing that each spark is fleeting, yet each one carries the promise of warmth. Chemistry was not alive, but it was moving closer, 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 like a dawn still hidden below the horizon, its glow just beginning to brush the edges of the night. Somewhere in these oceans, in a vent or a tide pool or a quiet lagoon, a handful of molecules folded just so. They created a shape that could hold onto energy a little longer and could resist being torn apart by the restless waves. And when they broke, they left behind fragments that could be used again, a kind of memory written into the very shape of matter. It was not life yet, but it was a rehearsal for it, a practice round written in the language of atoms and bonds. The world was filled with sparks of chemistry. They glimmered in storm-tossed pools, they shimmered in the shadows of the deep, they whispered through rivers that bled into the seas. And though most of these sparks faded into nothing, a few lingered, a few held on, a few began to build something more. In the grand silence of the Archean earth, this was the music that played, the constant, patient hum of molecules colliding, combining, and unfolding. No audience yet listened, no eyes yet saw, but the stage was being set. The curtain had not yet risen, and yet the first notes of the performance were already sounding in the darkness. One day, these sparks would become the foundation of life. They would become the engines of cells, the carriers of energy, the very threads of DNA. But for now, they were only beginnings, drifting gently in the endless waters, glowing faintly with possibility. The sparks of chemistry did not need to hurry. They did not need to force their way forward. They had all the time in the world, and the world was more than willing to wait. For ages upon ages, the oceans had been patient. They had gathered the elements, stirred them with currents, lit them with lightning, and warmed them with the fires of the sea. Molecules had danced and collided, breaking apart, reforming, repeating their endless experiments in silence. And then, one day, not in an instant, not with fanfare, but with the quiet inevitability of persistence, something changed. Within the gentle cradle of the ocean, inside a tiny chamber of rock or perhaps drifting freely in the waters, a cluster of molecules found balance. They folded and bound together in a way that held. This little assembly was different from the countless others that had come before. It could hold energy within itself, like a spark cupped in cupped hands. It could endure, and when it broke, it left behind fragments that carried its shape, ready to begin again. This was not yet a miracle in the sense of sudden magic. It was the slow work of time, the patience of countless trials. But at that moment, chemistry crossed an invisible boundary. What had once been simple matters began to act with purpose. The first cell, simple, fragile, yet full of promise, awakened. It was a prokaryote, a being without a nucleus, no larger than a speck, smaller than dust, unseen even if you stood right beside it. Its walls were thin and delicate, a bubble of molecules that sheltered the reactions within. Inside, simple machinery whirred, tiny chains of molecules gathering energy, copying themselves, repairing damage. It was not conscious, not aware, but it persisted. And in persistence, there was life. Imagine it, a tiny bubble drifting in the vastness of the Archean ocean, carried by currents, swayed by tides. Around it, the waters were immense, endless, heavy with storms and minerals. The young Earth was a place of fire and thunder, but within this speck, there was something new, an order that could continue, a whisper that would not fade with the next wave. The first cell did not stand alone for long. From its shape, from its fragile persistence, others followed. Some were born from division, one cell splitting into two, two into four, four into eight, each carrying the same fragile instructions within. Others arose anew, built from the same chemistry, repeating its quiet dance elsewhere. Soon, the oceans, though still silent to the ear, were no longer empty. They were filled with drifters, tiny, invisible sparks of life, multiplying, spreading, enduring. They had no eyes to see, no voices to call, no limbs to move. And yet, in their simplicity, they carried within them the seeds of everything that would one day come. Every leaf, every feather, every heartbeat, every breath of every creature would trace its lineage back to these fragile pioneers. They were the ancestors of all things. It is humbling to think of it, that everything we know, every story ever told, every dream ever dreamed, can be traced back to these first cells. They were not grand, they were not complex, but they were alive. And in life, there was the beginning of endless possibility. The oceans embraced them gently. Currents carried them into shallows and into depths, across waves and into still waters. Some found warmth near the vents, feeding on the minerals that poured from the Earth's core. Others drifted toward the surface, where faint sunlight filtered through the haze of the atmosphere. Everywhere they went, they adapted, persisted, and survived. Life had begun not with a roar, but with a whisper. Not with a sudden explosion, but with a fragile spark held carefully within the arms of the ocean. And that was enough. From here, the story would grow. Cells would multiply, communities would form, new ways of gathering energy would arise. But in this moment, all that mattered was the awakening, the first breath, the first persistence, the first life in a world that had waited patiently for it. The first cell was small, but it was infinite in its meaning. For in that tiny bubble of life, the future was already written. Once the first cells had awakened, the oceans began to change in ways subtle and unseen. It was not a sudden transformation, not a rush of new creatures bursting into being, but a quiet blossoming. A slow unfurling of possibility that spread cell by fragile cell, whisper by whisper, across the endless waters of Earth. The first prokaryotes were wanderers. They had no wings to fly, no fins to swim, no roots to anchor them. Instead, they drifted, tiny bubbles carried by the tides, slipping through currents, rising with the warmth of sunlight and falling back into the cool shadows below. To the vast ocean, they were nothing more than dust motes floating in the air of eternity. But to the story of life, they were everything. Imagine them as countless little beads of light, though unseen by any eye, moving together in gentle rhythms. They gathered near the warmth of hydrothermal vents, where mineral-rich waters fed them. They swirled in the shallows, where sunlight, faint and filtered through the coppery sky, reached down to touch the waves. They even sank into the quiet depths, where stillness and darkness reigned, yet where energy from the Earth's crust continued to seep upward. They had no need for speed or struggle. Survival for them was a matter of persistence. To copy themselves, to divide, to float onward, that was enough. Each cell was a traveler, carried by the whim of the sea. Each one was a pioneer, surviving in a world still raw and dangerous, yet perfectly suited to their simplicity. Picture the oceans now, not empty as they had been, but filled with invisible life. If you could dive into those waters and see with the eyes of imagination, you might glimpse them drifting in shimmering clouds, tiny communities moving together like dust in a shaft of sunlight. They coated the rocks near the shore, clung to minerals near the vents, and stretched in invisible strands across the waves. The seas were alive, though quietly, gently, without fanfare. The world of drifters was peaceful in its way. There were no predators yet, no hunters chasing the weak, no endless battles for survival as would come later. Each cell simply existed, feeding when it could, dividing when it was able, and letting the tides carry it onward. In this, there was a kind of calm, a steady rhythm that echoed the patience of the earth itself. Yet within this calm, change was always at work. Each time a cell copied itself, there was the chance of something new, a slight difference, a tiny shift in the pattern. Some of these changes meant nothing, others meant survival. Over time, the world of drifters began to diversify. Some cells thrived in heat, clinging to the fires of the vents. Others found comfort in cooler waters, letting the currents guide them far from shore. Still others began to seek energy in new ways, drawing strength from sunlight or from the chemicals dissolved in the sea. And so the oceans, once silent, now carried a hidden murmur, not of sound but of presence. Life was there, though it made no noise. It spread slowly, patiently, like dawn creeping across the horizon. If the earth could feel, it might have sighed in relief, for the long waiting was over. The story had begun. There is something profoundly cozy in imagining this world of drifters. A planet still wild with storms and fire, yet within its oceans, countless tiny lives drifting quietly, peacefully, endlessly. They asked for little, demanded nothing, and yet they transformed the earth simply by being. We are their children, all of us. Every breath you take, every heartbeat you feel, traces its lineage back to those first drifters. They had no names, no thoughts, no dreams, and yet their persistence opened the door for everything that followed. The oceans held them gently, cradling them in tides that rose and fell without end. And in their drifting, the first cells wrote the opening lines of a story that would last for billions of years, the story of life. Far below the rolling waves, beyond the reach of sunlight, where the sea pressed heavy and eternal, the first living cells faced their greatest test. The deep ocean was no gentle cradle. It was a place of extremes, darkness absolute, silence unbroken, and pressure so immense it could crush stone. Yet here, in this quiet abyss, life endured. The drifters that found themselves carried into these depths had no eyes to miss the light, no lungs to gasp for air, no bones to be broken by the weight of water. They were simple, soft, and small, and in their simplicity lay their strength. To the crushing deep, they bent without breaking. To the silence, they gave their own quiet hum of chemistry. They had no need for light or sound. They needed only the bare essentials, a flow of energy, a thread of nutrients, a chance to divide and begin again. The deep was not empty. From cracks in the seafloor rose plumes of warmth, the steady breath of the earth itself. Hydrothermal vents poured minerals into the water, rich with iron and sulfur, with chemicals that could be harnessed for survival. Around these vents, the drifters clustered, feeding on the gifts of the planet's restless heart. They were sustained not by sunlight, but by fire hidden beneath stone. Imagine these vents as vast undersea hearths, glowing softly in the darkness. Around them, the water shimmered with currents, hot streams colliding with the icy cold of the deep. Within these shifting boundaries, life carved out its niche. The first cells learned to take what the earth offered and weave it into survival. Some absorbed the minerals directly, breaking them apart to fuel their own inner rhythms. Others relied on the currents to bring them new sustenance. Survival here was no easy thing. The vents were fickle. They flared with heat one moment, collapsed into silence the next. A chimney might grow high, spewing warmth into the waters, only to crumble suddenly, burying its fragile inhabitants in stone. Yet the drifters endured. They clung to life in ways as patient as the tides themselves. If one vent closed, they were carried to another. If one cluster perished, others continued elsewhere. It was not resilience in the human sense of determination or willpower, but resilience written into the very fabric of their being. To divide, to multiply, to persist, this was enough. The deep had no seasons, no days or nights. Time here was marked only by the steady heartbeat of the vents, the slow drift of currents, the constant pressure of the ocean's weight. And yet, in this monotony, life flourished in its own quiet way. The drifters found stability where others would have seen only emptiness. They became masters of patience, building communities that thrived not in abundance, but in scarcity. Picture the scene, great plumes rising from the seafloor, shimmering in the dark, and around them, tiny invisible lives swirling in the warmth. No fish dart through these waters, no whales sing, no eyes watch the vents glow. And yet this place is alive. Alive not with grandeur, but with subtlety. Alive with the quiet persistence of cells that refuse to vanish. And this, too, is cozy in its way. There is comfort in knowing that life does not always demand brightness or ease. Sometimes it finds its footing in the most unlikely of places, in the shadows, in the silence, in the deep. These first survivors remind us that endurance does not need spectacle. It needs only patience, persistence, and the gentle rhythm of repetition. For millions of years, this was the way of the world. Life held on in the deep, shaped by vents, carried by currents, waiting for what came next. The oceans above raged with storms, the skies split with lightning, the mountains rose and fell, but in the abyss, the drifters carried on. Unseen, unheard, they survived, and survival in those early days was enough. The deep was no easy home, but it was a faithful one, and in its shadows, life learned the first lesson it would never forget: to endure. The first cell was fragile, a bubble of life adrift in an endless sea, but it was not alone for long. Within itself lay the quiet miracle of copying, the ability to divide, to split into two, to give rise to another just like it. And from that gift, life began to spread. The first division was small, almost unremarkable. 1 became 2, 2 became 4, 4 became 8. With each division, the ocean gained another flicker of life, another spark drifting in its depths. It was the beginning of generations, not of families as we know them, not yet of parents or children, but of continuity. A cell could pass on its shape, its rhythm, its fragile instructions. In doing so, it built a chain that stretched forward into time. Imagine these early generations multiplying slowly in the cradle of the sea. They did not hurry. Each division took time, guided by the slow machinery of molecules folding and unfolding within. But time was abundant, and the ocean was vast. With every cycle, the world became less empty. Clouds of cells gathered near the warmth of the vents, faint veils of life invisible to the eye, but filling the waters with presence. Soon there were countless drifters, each one fragile, each one simple, and yet together they began to transform the ocean. When one cell died, it released its pieces back into the water, fragments that could be taken up by others. In this way, nothing was wasted. Death, too, became part of the cycle, feeding life, enriching the sea, weaving the story forward. The first generations were explorers, though not by choice. They had no minds to wander, no feet to wander, but the currents carried them to new places all the same. Some remained in the deep, clustering near the fires of the earth. Others drifted into the shallows, feeling for the first time the faint warmth of the sun. Still others rode the tides across distances beyond imagining, spreading life to every corner of the sea. The oceans became their home, and every drop of water carried with it the chance of a new beginning. What's remarkable is how much patience this required. There were no leaps, no sudden bursts of complexity. Each generation was much like the last, a steady echo of what had come before, but slowly, quietly, differences began to creep in. Some cells were a little stronger, their walls thicker, able to endure harsher currents. Others were better at using the minerals that surrounded them, feeding more efficiently. These small changes, over countless generations, began to shape the story. Picture it as a great tapestry being woven thread by thread. Each cell is a stitch, small and humble on its own, but as the stitches multiply, patterns begin to emerge, communities form, certain traits spread, certain rhythms repeat. From the patience of division, a larger order begins to take shape. The first generations remind us of something deeply cozy, that continuity itself is a kind of comfort. To know that what comes after carries within it the memory of what came before, to know that life is a chain stretching unbroken through time. These first cells did not know it, but they were writing a story that would one day include forests and rivers, birds and whales, laughter and music. All of it was hidden within their persistence, their patient multiplication. The oceans must have seemed alive in a new way now, not alive in great spectacles or sudden bursts of color, but alive in a hidden hum, a quiet murmur of cells dividing, drifting, and enduring. The waters carried countless generations, each one a continuation of the first whisper of life. And though no eye could see them, no ear could hear them, the earth itself must have felt their presence. Generations passed like waves, each one rising, dividing, fadding, and giving way to the next. Some lines ended, lost to chance. Others endured, carried forward into the future. Bit by bit, the resilience of life deepened, its roots sinking into the ocean, its presence spreading ever wider. It is humbling to think that all of this began with a single cell, a fragile spark in a vast and hostile world. From that spark came generations uncounted, each one carrying the torch forward, and in their persistence, they transformed the earth forever. The first generations were not grand, but they were steady. They were the rhythm upon which all later life would dance. They were the gentle heartbeat of the ocean, pulsing quietly through the dark, reminding the world that life, once begun, has no end. The oceans, once empty, now stirred with countless drifters. Fragile though they were, simple though their forms seemed, these first prokaryotes were not merely passengers in the vastness of Earth's waters. They were workers, builders, quiet architects who, without intention or awareness, began reshaping the world around them. Every cell was a tiny engine, drawing in the minerals and chemicals that swirled through the seas, breaking them apart, using what they needed, and releasing the rest. At first glance, this seems so small, so insignificant. What could such tiny creatures possibly change? But here lies one of the most profound truths of life. Change often begins in whispers. When carried out by trillions, even the smallest act reshapes the earth itself. The prokaryotes consumed iron, sulfur, carbon, and nitrogen, weaving these elements into their fragile structures. They lived, they multiplied, they died, and in death they returned their pieces back to the sea. In this endless cycle, the oceans themselves began to transform. The chemistry of the water shifted, layer by layer, molecule by molecule, until the planet was no longer the same place it had been. Imagine, for a moment, looking upon the Archean Earth as though it were a great canvas. For billions of years, that canvas had been painted only by fire and stone, by rain and storms, by the patient hand of geology. Now, however, new painters have arrived. They carried no brushes, no colors, no plan, and yet, in their endless persistence, they began to lay down strokes of a new masterpiece, the first biological shaping of the planet. At first, their work was invisible. The seas looked the same, dark, mineral-rich, roiling beneath a copper sky. But within those waters, iron began to bond with oxygen released by certain pioneering cells. This oxygen did not yet fill the air. It was trapped quickly by the oceans, by the rocks, by the very minerals around it. The cells never knew what they were doing. They simply survived, drawing energy from light or minerals. Yet their survival left traces, and those traces began to add up. The result was banded iron formations, layers of stone that recorded the slow and steady work of these ancient architects. Red and black stripes painted into the ocean floor, built not by storms or volcanoes, but by the breath of invisible drifters. To look at these rocks today is to glimpse the fingerprints of the earliest life. They are monuments not of kings or empires, but of bacteria whose quiet labor reshaped the chemistry of the seas. Beyond oxygen, other transformations were at work. Some cells learned to bind nitrogen, pulling it from the air and stitching it into forms that could be used by life. Others found ways to release methane, altering the climate in ways subtle but lasting. These processes, tiny on their own, became vast in their accumulation. The Earth itself was being remodeled from the inside out, not by storms or fire, but by invisible hands drifting in the oceans. Think of it, mountains rose and fell in the span of eons, yet these cells outlasted them. Continents shifted and cracked, yet the bacteria endured, patiently continuing their work. They were not mighty in size, but mighty in number, not swift, but persistent. Their labor was steady and their influence unshakable. It is here in the patience of these ancient architects that we see the first lesson of life's great power, not in violence or spectacle, but in quiet repetition. A cell dividing, a cell consuming, a cell release. Over and over, for millions upon millions of years. Like drops of water wearing away stone, their persistence reshaped the planet itself. And there is something profoundly cozy in this thought. That the world we know, the blue skies, the breathable air, the rich soils beneath our feet, was not forged in a single moment of grandeur, but in the gentle, ceaseless work of countless unseen lives. That creation itself is not always loud, but often quiet, subtle, and patient. By the time the first continents began to rise higher from the seas, the Earth was already forever changed. The oceans held oxygen in their depths. The rocks carried stripes of red iron, silent testimony to life's labor. And still the prokaryotes drifted on, unaware of the empire they were building. They were the first architects, not of stone cities or golden towers, but of the biosphere itself. Every breath of air, every bite of food, every green leaf that would one day sway in the breeze carried within it the legacy of these tiny builders. They were architects of the unseen, whose blueprints were written not in parchment or clay, but in molecules and in time. The world was no longer shaped by geology alone. It was being shaped by biology, by life itself. And though the builders were invisible, their work would endure forever. For millions of years, the first cells had clung to the deep, surviving on the warmth of vents and the chemistry of stone. Yet the oceans were not only a place of shadows. Above, where the surface rippled beneath a copper sky, sunlight poured down. Dim and filtered though it was, it carried something the deep could not. A steady stream of energy, constant and patient, waiting to be harvested. Somewhere in the shallows, where the water was warm and stirred gently by tides, certain cells discovered this gift. They learned to gather the light, to capture its energy, to store it within themselves. It was not a sudden revelation, not a spark of brilliance. It was the slow unfolding of possibility, molecules shifting, rearranging, adapting. And from this adaptation came something extraordinary: photosynthesis. Imagine it, tiny bubbles of life drifting upward, closer and closer to the surface, where light pierced the haze. The waters shimmered golden, not with fish or plants, but with microscopic cells learning to drink the sun. They stretched their delicate machinery to catch the faint rays, weaving sunlight into energy, turning water and carbon into fuel. In doing so, they became not just survivors, but creators. This was a new kind of existence. Until now, life had been bound to the energy of the Earth's interior, to vents, to minerals, to chemical exchanges. But here in the shallows, a new freedom was found. The sun became a partner, a steady and generous source of nourishment. Each ray of light was a thread, and the cells wove those threads into the fabric of life itself. The oceans began to glow with invisible gardens. Near the coasts, where rocky shores met the sea, mats of bacteria formed, clinging to stone in thin films. They layered upon one another, stacking, spreading, building living carpets that swayed with the currents. These mats captured light during the day, then rested in the quiet of night, beginning again each dawn. If you could stand above these shallow seas, the world might look unchanged. The waters would still be dark, the skies still heavy, the land still bare. Yet beneath the surface, an unseen revolution was taking place. The first green pigment, chlorophyll, was at work, catching light, weaving energy, and in the process, releasing a breath of something entirely new: oxygen. At first, the oxygen was caught quickly, absorbed by the iron dissolved in the sea. It left no trace in the air, but painted the oceans red as it bonded with iron to form rust, falling to the seafloor in endless layers. The world did not yet notice, and yet, already, the stage was being set for change greater than any before. These shallow water pioneers were architects not just of their own survival, but of a new Earth. They had found a way to turn sunlight into life, to take what was abundant and weave it into sustenance. Slowly, steadily, they multiplied. Each new cell carried the same gift, the same ability to catch light and make it fuel. With every generation, the seas grew richer, more alive, more ready for what would come. There is a special coziness in this thought, that the very sunlight warming your face today was once caught by these tiny ancestors, that the breath you take is filled with the legacy of their invisible work. Long before trees stretched their branches skyward, long before fields of grass waved in the wind, long before flowers opened their petals in the morning, there were these drifters in the shallows, quietly harvesting the sun. The earth was still silent then. No birds called, no insects buzzed, no leaves rustled. Yet within the oceans, a quiet chorus had begun. It was not heard in sound, but in cycles of energy, in the steady heartbeat of photosynthesis. Light fell upon the waters, cells caught it, and life expanded. Over and over, day after day, age after age. In time, these shallow water cells would change everything. They would give the planet the gift of air. They would lay the foundation for all the forests and meadows and jungles to come. But in these early days, they asked for nothing more than the light and the chance to drift gently in the sunlit shallows. The world was still young. The continents were small, the skies were strange, and the oceans were vast. But now, for the first time, Earth has begun to glow with the quiet work of cells catching sunlight. It was the dawn of a new way of life. For billions of years, The Earth's palette had been simple: the deep grays of stone, the fiery reds of lava, the shifting coppers and golds of the hazy sky. The oceans, too, had been dark, painted in shadowy greens and rusty tones by the minerals that bled into them. But with the arrival of photosynthesis, something new began to stir within the waters, color born not of geology, but of biology. The first pigments appeared in the smallest of places. Microscopic cells, drifting in the shallows, carried within them delicate molecules that caught the sun. Some were shades of green, like the first whispers of leaves yet to come. Others shimmered in reds, purples, and even golds, each hue the product of a unique adaptation, a unique way of gathering light and turning it into life. The seas, once uniform and heavy, now glowed with subtle, shifting tints. Imagine standing on the rocky shore of the Archean world. At first glance, the ocean looks the same, vast, restless, endless. But if you could see with finer eyes, if you could peer into the shallows and the drifting currents, you would notice something remarkable. Thin mats of microbes, delicate as silk, coat the rocks beneath the waves. They glisten faintly in shades of emerald and rust, rippling as the water moves over them. In the currents, clouds of bacteria drift like invisible galaxies, their pigments catching light, scattering it, painting the waters with hidden rainbows. The colors of life were not bright in the way we know them now. There were no coral reefs glowing like jewels, no forests dressed in emerald green. But compared to the long monotony of stone and fire, these first hues were a revolution. They were life announcing itself not with sound, not with motion, but with light. The earth was beginning to wear new clothes, woven not by mountains or rivers, but by cells no larger than dust. Each pigment told a story. Green pigments captured the sun's energy most efficiently, turning it into the rhythm of photosynthesis. Red and purple pigments belonged to bacteria that lived in slightly different conditions, absorbing light others left behind. Together, they formed a hidden mosaic, a tapestry spread across the oceans. The seas became living canvases, brushed gently with colors that shimmered and shifted in the glow of the Archean sun. There is something deeply cozy in imagining this slow unfurling of beauty. No one was there to admire it, no eyes gazed upon it, no minds pondered it. And yet, the colors bloomed all the same. They did not need an audience. They existed because that is what life does. It grows, it changes, it paints the world simply by being. The oceans, once dark and empty, had become a living gallery. The pigments also held purpose beyond beauty. They were shields, protecting the delicate machinery of the cells from too much light. They were tools, allowing life to survive in different depths, in different conditions. But as they spread, they created something greater than utility. They created diversity. No longer was the sea filled with only one kind of drifter, but with many, each carrying its own color, its own way of living, its own place in the story. Over time, these colors gathered into patterns. Microbial mats thickened, layering greens upon reds, purples upon browns. Stromatolites, living mounds built by colonies of microbes, rose in shallow waters, their surfaces painted in subtle shades. The oceans rippled with movement, and the movement shimmered with light. The earth itself seemed to breathe more deeply now, dressed not only in fire and stone, but in life's first colors. The palette was still simple, but it was enough. Enough to mark a new chapter in creation, enough to remind the planet that it was no longer silent stone, but a home for living things. And so the colors spread. From shallow lagoons to tidal flats, from drifting currents to hidden coves, pigments caught the sun, painted the seas, and filled the world with the first faint promise of beauty. It is humbling to think that the greens of forests, the blues of feathers, the reds of flowers, and the countless hues of life today all trace their lineage back to these first pigments. What we call beauty now began here, in the silent seas of the Archean, when tiny cells painted the waters for the first time. The colors of life had arrived, and though faint, though hidden, they would never fade. The first colors had spread across the oceans, the first oxygen had been released into the waters, and the first communities of microbes had begun to take root. And then nothing dramatic followed. No sudden rise of animals, no forests reaching toward the sky, no songs of birds or cries of creatures. Instead, the earth settled into a long, steady rhythm, a rhythm of patience that would last for billions of years. Life had begun, but it was in no hurry. The cells multiplied, divided, drifted, and clung to rocks in the shallows. They formed mats that thickened and grew, only to be washed away by tides and built again. They clustered around vents in the deep, fed by the heat of the earth, waiting quietly in the darkness. And in this persistence, the world began to change, but so slowly, so gently, that it would take an eternity for the difference to be seen. Imagine standing by the edge of the Archean Sea and watching it through the lens of deep time. A single wave crashes against the rocks, then recedes, and another follows. Days pass, marked by the coppery light of dawn and the dim glow of dusk. Weeks slip into months, months into years, years into centuries. The microbial mats continue their work, layer by layer, breath by breath. Then 1,000,000 years pass, then 100 million. The Earth barely seems different, yet beneath its surface, within its oceans, life has been writing the same patient refrain. There is a coziness to this slowness, a calmness to the thought that life did not rush. It had no need for speed, no urgency to climb toward complexity. The first cells simply existed, repeating their cycles with quiet dedication. Every division was a promise, every generation a continuation. The oceans hummed with this steady pulse, as though the planet itself had fallen into a gentle meditation. The patience of time was not empty. It was filled with repetition, and repetition itself was creation. Each day the sun rose, fell, and rose again, feeding the shallow mats. Each vent exhaled warmth into the deep, feeding the drifters. Each storm poured minerals from the land into the seas, renewing the waters with the ingredients of life. It was a circle that never broke, a rhythm that never faltered. Billions of years passed in this way. Mountains rose and crumbled, volcanoes burned and cooled, continents shifted and cracked. Yet through it all, the microbes endured. Their patience was deeper than stone, their resilience steadier than fire. They were not swept away by change, they absorbed it, adapted to it, and continued their endless work. Picture the Earth in this long patience. From the perspective of the stars, it is a small world glowing faintly, wrapped in oceans and storms. From the perspective of the seas, it is a realm alive with unseen drifters, carrying on their silent labor. From the perspective of the microbes themselves, time does not exist. There is only the present moment: divide, persist, endure. This patience was the foundation of everything to come. Without it, there could have been no future. Life needed these billions of years to stabilize, to spread across every corner of the sea, to build the cycles of oxygen, carbon, and nitrogen that would one day support forests and animals and human breath. The quiet labor of microbes was not wasted time, it was preparation, laying the groundwork for all that followed. And there is comfort in that thought, that not all progress is fast, that sometimes the greatest transformations come not in bursts, but in long, steady silence, that patience itself is a form of power, and that life, once begun, has no need to hurry. The long patience of time was not empty waiting. It was a quiet symphony, played on the smallest of instruments in the vastest of theaters. A symphony that would last for billions of years before its next great crescendo. And through it all, the first cells drifted, multiplied, and endured, silent witnesses to the slow unfolding of Earth's story. For countless ages, life remained invisible, so small, so delicate, that the ocean seemed unchanged. But slowly, in the shallows where sunlight danced across rocks and tides rolled in and out, something new began to rise. Tiny cells, clustering together in communities, began to build. And what they built was not fleeting or fragile, but enduring, as though life had decided at last to leave its first footprints upon the earth. These were the stromatolites, layer upon layer of microbes stacked atop one another, bound together by the minerals of the sea. They grew slowly, impossibly slowly, each new generation laying down a thin film of life, capturing sunlight, dividing and dying, leaving behind a hardened layer upon which the next would settle. Over time, these layers rose into mounds and domes, quiet monuments to patience. At first they were small, no higher than a hand, no wider than a step. But as the centuries passed, they grew taller, broader, more intricate. From a distance, they may have looked like strange rocks, scattered across the tidal flats, washed daily by waves. Yet unlike stone, they were alive, living communities of countless cells, working together in a harmony they never chose but always maintained. Imagine standing on the shore of an Archean sea, the air heavy with mist, the waves rolling softly in. Beneath the surface, you see rounded forms rising from the sand, glistening faintly in the filtered sunlight. Their surfaces are slick, coated with slimy mats of green and purple microbes. Each mat is alive, catching the light, drawing energy, breathing oxygen into the waters. And though they seem still, they are growing, so slowly that no human eye could ever notice, but growing all the same. The stromatolites were not just structures, they were sanctuaries. Within their layers, microbes found shelter from currents, from predators that would one day come. The community was stronger than the individual. Each layer protected the ones beneath it, each generation paving the way for the next. In this way, stromatolites became the first great experiment in cooperation. Over time, they transformed coastlines. Shallow bays filled with their rounded shapes, stretching out like fields of low, stony hills. Tidal flats became gardens of living stone, each mound a thriving community of billions of unseen lives. Day after day, they captured the light, weaving energy from the sun into the cycles of the earth. Night after night, they rested, only to rise again with the dawn. And they left a record. Every layer of mineral trapped within their mats became a page in Earth's earliest diary. To look upon stromatolites today is to read the story of the first architects of community, the first builders of something that endured beyond the fragile span of a single cell. Their fossils are still with us, scattered across ancient rocks, silent testimony to the power of cooperation and time. There is something profoundly cozy in this thought, that the first visible traces of life on Earth were not grand creatures or mighty forests, but gentle communities of microbes, working together in silence, leaving behind mounds of stone that still whisper their story billions of years later. The stromatolites remind us that life does not always need speed or spectacle to make its mark. Sometimes it only needs patience. A thin film of cells, repeated countless times, becomes a tower. A single layer of life, stacked over eons, becomes a monument. From the smallest actions, repeated endlessly, the world is changed. In their quiet, unassuming way, these communities of stone were the Earth's first landscapes built by life. They transformed the shallows into gardens, not of flowers or trees, but of living mounds rising from the tide. They were humble, but they were enduring. And in their endurance, they became the first great symbols of life's ability to build not just for the present, but for the future. The Earth had gained new voices, not in sound, but in form, not in fleeting sparks, but in stone. And through these voices, the planet began to speak of life not as a hidden whisper, but as something that could be seen, touched, and remembered. The stromatolites were the first great communities, the first visible architects, the first sign that life had moved beyond the invisible into the tangible. They stand as living proof that patience, when carried forward in countless layers, becomes something greater than itself. And in their stony silence, they remind us even now, life builds slowly, but it builds forever. The stromatolites grew patiently in the shallows, capturing sunlight and weaving it into energy. And as they did, they exhaled something entirely new into the world: oxygen. At first, this oxygen seemed like nothing, a fleeting breath that vanished almost as soon as it was born. The oceans swallowed it greedily, reacting with the metals that filled their depths. Iron, dissolved in the waters of the Archean seas, met oxygen for the first time, and together they began to paint the planet. Each molecule of oxygen bonded with iron, turning it into rust, tiny flakes of reddish-brown that drifted downward like silt. Slowly, silently, they settled on the seafloor layer after layer. Then the oxygen was consumed and the rusting paused. Later, when more oxygen was released, the process began again, creating alternating bands of red and black, iron oxide and unreacted iron, stacked upon one another like pages in a book. These were the banded iron formations, and they became Earth's first great record of life's hidden breath. Imagine standing by the shore of the Archean Sea. To the eye, little seems different. The waters still roll in endless waves, the sky still glows coppery and strange, the air still heavy with haze. Yet beneath the surface, a transformation is underway. Invisible drifters and microbial mats work tirelessly, splitting water with the power of sunlight, releasing oxygen that no creature yet breathes. The oceans quietly drink in this gift, and in doing so, they change their very nature. The seafloor becomes a canvas. Across the vast basins of the ocean, iron settles into stripes, red upon black, black upon red, repeating endlessly over millions of years. Each layer marks the pulse of microbial life, each band a testament to the patience of bacteria who never knew the scale of what they were creating. To us, these formations are rocks, heavy and silent. To the Earth, they were the first murals painted by life itself. The oxygen never lasted long in those early days. The oceans were too rich with iron, too eager to consume each breath, but life did not falter. The stromatolites kept growing, the drifting cells kept multiplying, and the oxygen kept flowing, small exhale by small exhale. Slowly, steadily, the balance tipped. The oceans grew clearer, the iron settled into stone, and oxygen began to linger longer than before. There is something profoundly cozy in this thought, that the first breath of life was not wasted, even when it vanished into the sea. Every molecule of oxygen mattered. Every exhale carried forward, slowly transforming the waters, patiently writing the story of change into stone. Life did not rush. It did not need to. Time was its companion, and patience its greatest tool. To walk along the coasts of Earth today, to find a piece of banded iron rock glinting in the sunlight, is to hold a relic of this ancient breath. Those red and black stripes are whispers from billions of years ago, the signature of microbes who lived, worked, and died long before any eyes were there to see them. They are monuments not of kings or empires, but of cells no larger than dust, whose persistence reshaped the chemistry of the oceans. The breathing of iron was not a single moment, but an age-long process. For hundreds of millions of years, the cycle repeated: oxygen released, oxygen consumed, iron falling to the seafloor in endless bands. It was slow, almost imperceptible, but in that slowness lay the foundation for everything to come. Without this hidden labor, there could have been no future forests, no lungs to breathe, no skies filled with birds or clouds reflecting blue above green hills. The iron formations were Earth's first proof that life could alter the very face of the planet. And though the bacteria themselves never knew it, their quiet work prepared the stage for all that followed. The oceans had begun to change. The seafloor carried stripes of color, the waters grew cleaner, and in the silence, oxygen gathered, molecule by molecule, waiting for the day when it would no longer vanish into the depths, but rise, at last, into the air. For now, though, the story was still one of patience. The microbes lived their simple lives, clinging to stone, drifting in currents, breathing out their invisible gift. The oceans absorbed it, the iron consumed it, and the earth was quietly transformed. Life had found its voice, not in sound but in breath, not in words but in chemistry. The world was being painted red and black by cells too small to see, architects who built not with stone or clay, but with oxygen, persistence, and time. And in this slow, steady breathing of iron, the future was already taking shape. The young Earth was never still. It was a world of fire and water, of calm horizons shattered by sudden violence. Volcanoes rose high above the oceans, their peaks glowing with molten fire, then collapsed back into the sea with thunderous force. Earthquakes split the crust, sending shockwaves through the waters. Storms brewed across the copper sky, unleashing rains so heavy they reshaped the coasts in a single day. And from time to time, rocks from the heavens themselves came crashing down, blazing through the atmosphere, striking with power enough to boil seas and darken skies. For fragile life, this was no gentle cradle. The first cells were small, simple, and without defenses. They had no shells to protect them, no wings to carry them away, no burrows to hide within. And yet they endured. They endured the fire, they endured the floods, they endured the storms. They endured because persistence was written into their very being. To divide, to drift, to begin again, this was their strength, and it was enough. Imagine the world as it must have been. A volcanic island smoldering in the distance, plumes of ash drifting across the sky. The air is thick with the scent of sulfur, the seas hiss where rivers of lava pour into them, steam rising in towering clouds. Lightning splits the sky, striking the waves again and again, igniting the very rain that falls. To us, such a scene would seem apocalyptic, but for the microbes in the sea, it was simply another day. When lava flowed, it carried minerals into the waters, new food for those who could use it. When storms raged, the rains mixed chemicals into the sea, refreshing the cycles of life. Even meteor strikes, devastating in their violence, created pools and basins rich with new ingredients. Destruction was never the end, it was simply part of the rhythm. Out of chaos came renewal, and life learned to weave itself into both. The microbes had no awareness of their resilience. They did not plan or adapt by choice. They simply endured, dividing quietly, persisting through every upheaval, and in this way they became masters of survival. Fire could not erase them, floods could not wash them away, storms could not silence them, even impacts from the heavens could not destroy their patient presence. They were too small to be defeated, too numerous to be erased, too simple to be undone. There is something profoundly cozy in this lesson, that life's strength often lies not in grandeur but in humility. A mountain can crumble in a single eruption, a continent can shift in a single quake, but the smallest of cells carried on through it all. Their story was not one of triumph over chaos, but of coexistence with it. They did not resist the storms, they drifted through them. They did not fight the fire, they fed from its gifts. In their simplicity, they found resilience. And so the earth raged and life endured. For millions upon millions of years, the cycle repeated. Volcanoes rose, seas boiled, storms roared, and still the microbes multiplied. Each new cataclysm left scars upon the planet, but also opportunities. Life filled the cracks, settled into the new pools, clung to the new rocks. With every upheaval, it spread further, adapted more deeply, and became even more entrenched in the fabric of the world. From the quiet perspective of deep time, these storms and fires were not interruptions. They were part of the story itself. Without them, the chemistry of the seas would have stagnated. Without them, new niches would not have opened. Life and chaos danced together, partners in the same long song. And in the end, the storms of fire and water only proved the truth that had been written since the first cell awakened, that life, once begun, does not easily end. It bends, it shifts, it waits, and in waiting, it endures. When we step outside on a clear night today, we see a sky filled with stars, countless points of light scattered across the darkness, ancient fires burning in silence. We see the curve of the Milky Way, pale and soft, a river of brilliance stretched from horizon to horizon. But on the Archean Earth, such a sight was impossible. The skies were not clear, the heavens were not open. For millions upon millions of years, nights passed without stars. The atmosphere was thick, heavy with methane, carbon dioxide, and volcanic haze. Dust from eruptions lingered for centuries. Clouds of steam rose endlessly from the oceans, mixing with gases to form a veil that wrapped the earth. By day, the sun shone dimly, filtered through copper and gold. By night, the heavens glowed faintly with the same haze, obscuring the starlight beyond. The moon hung above, pale and ghostly, but the stars were hidden, their brilliance lost behind the curtain. Imagine standing on a rocky shore in that ancient world. The air is warm, heavy, and still. The sea laps quietly against the stone, the only sound in the silence of night. Above you stretches a sky not dark, but murky, glowing faintly orange or red, depending on the thickness of the haze. There are no constellations, no patterns to follow, no sense of vastness beyond. Only the veil, stretching endlessly, a blanket of cloud and vapor that keeps the universe hidden. And yet this sky had its own beauty. From time to time, lightning would ripple across the heavens, flashing silver against the haze, illuminating the seas below. Volcanic eruptions would paint the sky with strange glows, the ash clouds catching light in deep reds and purples. Meteorites, burning as they struck the atmosphere, would appear not as delicate streaks of light, but as sudden bursts, lighting the sky in fiery arcs before vanishing into the depths of the sea. For the microbes drifting in the ocean, this sky was irrelevant. They had no eyes to see, no thoughts to wonder. But for us, imagining this world, there is something cozy in the thought of such hidden skies. A reminder that Earth's early nights were not yet a stage for starlight, but a private cocoon, where life was free to grow without the watchful eyes of the universe above. The nights without stars were a time of intimacy between the Earth and its oceans. The world seemed enclosed, self-contained, as though wrapped in its own womb. The sky was not an open window to infinity, but a sheltering veil, keeping the young planet's secrets close. Within that shroud, life was safe, unbothered by the vastness beyond, free to multiply quietly in its hidden seas. And yet beyond the haze, the stars were still there. They shone as they always had, as they always will, their light streaming endlessly across the void. The microbes could not see them. The oceans could not reflect them. But the stars waited patiently, just as the Earth itself had waited, knowing that one day the skies would clear and their brilliance would be revealed. It is humbling to remember this, that the constellations we admire today, the same stars that guided ancient sailors, inspired myths, and stirred poets, were invisible for the first half of Earth's history. Life began in a world where the night was not full of stars, but full of haze and shadow. And still, life grew. It did not need the stars to guide it, only the patience of time and the embrace of the sea. There is comfort in this thought, that beauty does not always need to be seen to exist. The stars burned just as brightly, even when hidden. Life grew just as strongly, even without the heavens above to inspire it. The world was wrapped in a quiet, private darkness, a cozy silence beneath a veiled sky. And when, at last, the air would clear and the stars would shine again, life would be ready. Ready to look upward, ready to wonder, ready to stretch beyond the oceans. But for now, the nights remained soft and hidden, a time of rest beneath a sky without stars. For so long, the first cells had lived as drifters, solitary bubbles floating in the currents, dividing, drifting, enduring. Each one carried within it the quiet miracle of life, but each was alone, its existence separate from the rest. Yet in time, something new began to stir in the seas. Slowly, gently, life discovered that to be close was to be stronger, that to gather was to endure more deeply, that together, life could build more than it ever could alone. This was the beginning of cooperation. It began simply. Cells that clung to rock were less likely to be swept away by the tides. Those that stayed near vents shared the warmth and nutrients, forming clusters where each benefited from the presence of others. In the shallow waters, mats of microbes grew, layer upon layer, until they became carpets spread across the seafloor. Stromatolites rose higher, each dome a monument not to a single cell, but to billions working in silent harmony. Imagine drifting down into one of these ancient lagoons. The water is shallow, lit with golden light. Beneath the surface, the rocks are coated with mats of living cells, thick and glistening, swaying gently with the tide. They look like simple films, slimy and soft, but within them is a whole world. The upper layers catch the sun, drinking in the light and weaving it into energy. The lower layers, shaded from the glare, use what is left, feeding on the scraps, recycling the waste. Nothing is lost. Each layer depends on the other, and together they thrive. This was more than survival. It was the birth of a community. For the first time, life was not just a collection of individuals, but a network, a partnership, a weaving of many into one. There was no plan, no intention, no agreement, and yet the result was cooperation. The microbes did not need to know they were working together. They simply did, because the conditions of the world shaped them into harmony. There is something deeply cozy in this thought, that the first communities of life were not loud, not complex, not filled with drama or struggle, but gentle mats of cells living side by side. Their togetherness was quiet, their strength unspoken. They simply shared space, shared resources, and by doing so, created something greater than themselves. Over millions of years, this cooperation deepened. Some cells specialized, finding ways to perform tasks that others could not. Some produced oxygen, which filtered into the mats and allowed other cells to use it. Others broke down minerals or trapped nutrients. Each found its place, and in doing so, the community grew more resilient. Where a single cell might perish, a mat endured. Where one might fail, the group continued. And so the oceans changed again. The coasts became lined with microbial carpets, their surfaces painted in green and purple. The tidal pools shimmered with life woven into layers. Even the deep vents hosted colonies, clusters of cells building fortresses of chemistry against the darkness. Everywhere, life was discovering that togetherness was not just possible, but powerful. This was the whisper of cooperation, the first murmur of a theme that would echo across all of life's future. Plants would one day share space in forests, animals would hunt in packs, humans would build civilizations. But the very first hint of that story began here, in the Archean seas, when microbes realized, in their simple way, that to join together was to endure. It is humbling to think of it this way, that the roots of every community, every friendship, every partnership, trace back to these quiet mats of cells. That cooperation, which shapes so much of the living world today, began not with intention, but with the simple rhythm of survival. The whisper of cooperation was written into the earliest days, and it has never left us. The seas were no longer filled only with drifters. They were filled with builders, with communities, with colonies that stretched across rocks and rose toward the light. The earth itself was being reshaped not just by individuals, but by the combined strength of many. And in that whisper, the story of life took on a new harmony. When we think of empires, we imagine vast armies, towering cities, rulers seated upon golden thrones. We picture monuments built to endure, banners waving in the wind, voices shouting across crowded marketplaces. But the first empire on earth was nothing like this. It had no kings, no crowns, no armies. Its citizens were smaller than dust, its monuments invisible to the naked eye. And yet, for billions of years, it ruled the earth without challenge. This was the empire of microbes. Everywhere you looked, it was theirs. The deep oceans swirled with their presence, clouds of drifting cells carried by the tides. The shallow waters shimmered with mats of bacteria spread across rocks and sand. Stromatolites dotted the coasts, monuments built layer upon layer by microbial colonies. Even the seafloor itself bore their mark, painted with iron from their breath. There was no corner of the earth untouched by their dominion. And they needed no armies to hold it. Their power was in their numbers, their patience, their persistence. Where one cell perished, 1,000 others endured. Where storms swept them away, currents carried others to fill the space. Their empire was not built upon conquest, but upon abundance. It was not about ruling through strength, but about existing everywhere, quietly, ceaselessly. Imagine standing on the Archean shore, the copper sky overhead, the restless ocean stretching into the distance. To your eye, the world might seem empty. No forests sway in the wind, no birds circle the seas, no animals leave tracks along the sand. Yet hidden beneath the waves, an empire thrives. Every drop of water holds citizens, countless beyond imagining. Every tide carries whole communities. Every ray of light is caught, consumed, turned into energy by unseen hands. The world is alive, though silently, though invisibly. The unseen empire had no borders, no boundaries. It stretched from the deepest trenches to the highest tides, from the scalding waters of volcanic vents to the stillness of sheltered lagoons. Its citizens were small enough to ride on the back of a current, yet powerful enough to alter the chemistry of the planet. Their invisible work painted the seafloor, filled the oceans with oxygen, and prepared the seas for what would one day come. And there is something profoundly cozy in this thought, that the greatest rulers of Earth were not mighty beasts or towering giants, but tiny drifters smaller than the eye can see. They asked for no recognition, no monuments of stone or gold. Their empire was written in cycles of chemistry, in layers of rock, in the patience of time, and their reign lasted longer than any that would follow. For nearly 2 billion years, microbes held the Earth. They were the only life, the only architects, the only voices in the silence. Dinosaurs would one day rule for millions of years. Humans for only a fraction of that. But bacteria ruled for eons, their empire vast, enduring, and unchallenged. The unseen empire was not grand in the ways we often measure greatness, but it was grand in its scale and its persistence. It was the foundation of everything that followed. Without its labor, its quiet dominion, the earth would never have been ready for forests, for animals, for minds that dream. Even today, the legacy of this empire remains. Microbes still fill the oceans, still cover the land, still outnumber every other creature combined. They may no longer stand alone, but their empire has never truly ended. It continues, woven into every breath you take, every bite of food you eat, every heartbeat sustained by oxygen they once gave to the world. The first empire of Earth was unseen, unheard, uncelebrated, but it was vast, patient, and eternal, and in its silence, it wrote the blueprint of life itself. For ages upon ages, the unseen empire of microbes thrived, painting the oceans with iron, layering stone with stromatolites, drifting endlessly in tides and currents. Their lives were simple, their cycles steady, their patience unmatched. But quietly, invisibly, their work was building towards something vast. With every division, every mat of cells basking in the shallows, every breath of photosynthesis, they released a gift into the waters: oxygen. At first, this oxygen seemed to vanish as quickly as it appeared. The seas were filled with iron, eager to bond with it, pulling each molecule into rust that sank to the seafloor. For millions of years, the oceans drank deeply, consuming all the oxygen the microbes could give. But the cells were relentless. They multiplied, spread, and exhaled their breath day after day, age after age. And slowly, the balance began to shift. Imagine the oceans as a great vessel, filling drop by drop. At first, the vessel is empty, each drop vanishing into its depths without notice. But over time, the drops accumulate and the vessel begins to brim. So it was with oxygen. The iron grew saturated, the seas grew full. And when the waters could no longer swallow the breath of life, oxygen began to linger, molecule by molecule, in the ocean itself. The change was subtle. To the eye, nothing seemed different. The skies were still copper and gold, the seas still dark and mineral-rich, the land still barren and silent. Yet within the waters, a revolution was unfolding. Oxygen, once consumed instantly, now began to gather. At first it was faint, fleeting, held close to the microbial mats that produced it. But over time, it spread further, lasting longer, transforming the chemistry of the seas in ways unseen. For the microbes themselves, oxygen was both a blessing and a curse. Some thrived upon it, discovering new ways to harness its energy, to burn fuel more efficiently, to grow and multiply more quickly. Others found it toxic, a dangerous gas that threatened their delicate machinery. Many perished in the presence of this new breath, driven into the shadows of the deep where oxygen could not reach. The slow rise of oxygen was not just a change, it was a test, a reshaping of life itself. There is a deep coziness in reflecting on this slow breath of change. It did not roar into the world all at once, as a storm or fire might. It came quietly, gently, like dawn spreading across the horizon. Each day, another whisper of oxygen was released. Each day, another trace lingered. The earth did not awaken suddenly, but gradually, with patience, with grace. And yet the consequences of this patience were immense. The very face of the planet began to alter. Minerals that had once been stable are now transformed in the presence of oxygen. Rocks changed color, rivers carried new chemicals, and the oceans themselves shifted toward clarity. Life had begun to shape not just itself, but its world. The unseen empire was no longer only surviving within the Earth's conditions, it was rewriting them. Picture the stromatolites in the shallows, bathed in golden light, exhaling their oxygen into the tide. Around them, invisible clouds of gas drift upward, dissolving into the water. To the microbes, it is a byproduct, nothing more. To the Earth, it is the beginning of a new age. This oxygen will one day fill the skies, will one day allow forests to spread, animals to breathe, humans to speak and sing. But for now, it remains gentle, quiet, unnoticed. The slow breath of change was not a moment, but an era. It lasted for hundreds of millions of years, a steady exhale that transformed the world molecule by molecule. It reminds us that not all revolutions are sudden. Some unfold in whispers, in patience, in the quiet persistence of countless lives, repeating the same small acts until the weight of their work reshapes the earth itself. And so the oxygen gathered. Slowly, patiently, inevitably, it crept into the oceans, settled into the rocks, and began to glance upward toward the skies. The earth was changing, though it did not yet know it. Life was preparing a future it could not imagine. The unseen empire continued, unaware of the magnitude of its work. The microbes simply lived, divided, and breathed. But with every breath, the world shifted closer to what it would one day become. This was the slow breath of change, and it was the beginning of everything. Billions of years have passed since the first cell awakened in the quiet depths of the Archean seas. The earth has shifted and grown, continents have risen and fallen, oceans have stretched and shrunk, skies have changed from copper haze to brilliant blue. The planet has been shaped by fire and ice, by cataclysm and calm. Yet through all of this, the legacy of those first prokaryotes has never faded. It is written into every breath, every heartbeat, every leaf that sways in the wind. Those earliest cells were simple, fragile bubbles of life drifting in the currents, no larger than dust, invisible to any eye. And yet, from their patience and persistence, everything has unfolded. They are the ancestors of forests and rivers, of birds in flight and whales in the deep. They are the ancestors of us. Imagine their endless generations, billions upon billions of cells dividing, multiplying, persisting through the storms of Earth. They had no awareness of their significance, no vision of the future. Yet their quiet labor changed the planet itself. They filled the seas with oxygen, painted the rocks with iron, and built the first communities of stone. They reshaped the Earth not through might or intention, but through repetition, tiny acts carried out endlessly, until the weight of time transformed them into destiny. Their gift was more than survival. It was continuity, a thread that stretched unbroken from the first cell to this very moment. Every living thing today carries within it the spark of their persistence. The language of DNA, the rhythms of metabolism, the very structures of cells, these are their legacy, passed forward across billions of years, whispered from one generation to the next without end. There is something profoundly cozy in this thought, that within you right now lies a spark as old as the Archean seas. Every heartbeat echoes their rhythm, every breath carries their gift of oxygen. Every cell in your body is a descendant of their unseen empire. You are, in a very real sense, a living continuation of their story. Think of the forests, stretching tall and green beneath the sun. Their roots drink water, their leaves weave light into energy, their cells divide and grow, all because the first prokaryotes once learned to do the same. Think of the birds, their wings cutting through the air, their lungs filled with oxygen, oxygen first breathed into the world by ancient bacteria. Think of humanity, building cities, writing stories, dreaming of the stars, all of it possible only because of the patient work of life's earliest pioneers. Their legacy is not only in what they created, but in what they taught. That persistence matters more than grandeur, that cooperation is stronger than solitude, that patience, carried forward across ages, can transform the world. They were small, but they were steady. They were fragile, but they endured. And in their endurance lies the foundation of everything. Even today, their empire endures. Microbes still fill the oceans, still cling to the rocks, still drift through the air. They outnumber every other creature combined. They live in every soil, every river, every breath of wind. They are in you, around you, and within you. The eternal legacy of the Archean prokaryotes is not just in history, it is alive in this very moment. And there is comfort in knowing that life, once begun, never truly ends. It changes, it adapts, it grows more complex, but the thread remains unbroken. The same spark that flickered in the first bubble of life still burns now, passed from cell to cell, from age to age, from ocean to forest to you. The Archean seas are long gone, their copper skies replaced with blue. The world is filled now with trees, rivers, and creatures of every shape and size. Yet the story that began in those silent waters continues still, written in every living thing. The eternal legacy of the first bacteria is not a relic of the past, it is the living breath of the present. And so the story of life does not end. It stretches forward, as endless as the oceans, as steady as the tides, as patient as the stones. From the first cell drifting in the Archean waters to the world you see around you now, it is one unbroken tale. A tale of persistence, a tale of patience, a tale of eternal legacy.